Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Kelly from the Office of the Chief of Public Affairs. We have on our panel today the Honorable Christine Wormuth, Secretary of the Army, General James McConville, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston. The panel will give them an opportunity for any open remarks, then we'll open it up for questions. Please wait for me to call on you. We have 2 microphones that will be moving around the room. We are pressed for time, so we do ask, to the extent that you're able, please limit it to 1 follow-on and be respectful of the other media professionals in the room. When asking your question, please lead off with your name and organization. I'll turn over the panel for any opening remarks.
Since I just gave my speech, I'm not going to give opening remarks. I'm guessing you all have heard all you want. Just want to get to questions. So why don't we go ahead and open it up, Chief, unless you want to say.
No, I defer to the Secretary. We're ready to go.
Okay. Well, with that, then we'll start with the Associated Press.
Hi. Good morning. This is for both the Secretary and the Chief. You've all talked a lot about the recruiting and retention challenges this year. I'm hoping you can give us some specifics on what you plan to do in the next few months to try and meet your goal this year. And do you have an assessment at this point whether meeting the recruiting goal for 2023 is actually within your grasp? Thank you.
Lita, I would say it is very, very early to be speculating about where we're going to land at the end of FY23. So I don't think we're in a good position to answer that question right now. In terms of what we're going to be doing in the next few months, we have started the Future Soldier Prep Course. As I said in my speech, the early results of that look pretty promising. And depending on how that plays out in the next month or 2, I think we will look at expanding that to some additional training sites, which would obviously help us. Another thing we've done is we have partnered, the full power of ForceCom with our recruiting brigades, so that frankly we're just really, I would say, increasing the profile of the Army at events all across the United States. We also will be increasing the marketing that we spend, and we have very data-driven analysis that helps us look at how much marketing, what return on our investment we can get there. So I think we will be putting some more investment into marketing. And then, as I said, we have our recruiting task force who are tasked with helping us come up with what I think of as sort of what's the next big thing, what's the next big Future Soldier Prep Course. And part of the mandate of the task force is to help us identify that and get it moving.
And I just add that we really believe that exposure to the Army is really important. And it's not just by recruiters, it's for our soldiers for life, our hospital soldiers for life. They're out there right now. Those who've served, talking about the value of having been a soldier, our retirees and veterans, we think that's really important. We also think it's really important to get our soldiers who have been very successful in the Army to go back to their high schools and their communities and talk about what a difference it's made in their life. And we've opened up our gated communities, so people can see what's the life for a soldier. We've talked about this before, that 83% of the young men and women that come into the Army come from military families. They know what that is, and what we have to do is expose those who may not have the opportunity to understand what the Army is all about.
One quick follow-up, how soon will you expand the prep course to the other 3 locations?
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, right now we're in the process of developing plans to do that. We want to make sure that there is the amount of recruits that can do that. But the initial results that we're seeing is this may fundamentally change the way that we do recruiting. What I mean by that is we're getting young men and women that come. Some don't have the best ASVAB scores, or they don't have the best fitness. But we're finding out a lot about their commitment, about whether they want to serve or not, and we think this is very, very valuable because we can do this right up front before we invest a lot of resources in what it takes to go to initial military training. The other thing we're finding is for a lot of these young men and women, they were getting a head start on initial military training. So when they actually enter those ranks. They're actually ahead. And, you know, for those who've seen mission military training, we choose student leaders and they get a chance to do that. And we're seeing, you know, some of the recruits who, in some ways, by standards, might have been at the lower end of that capability, doing extremely well in mission military training. So we are excited to see how far this is going to go.
Okay, let's, we come up from to Caitlin Kenny.
Hi, Caitlin Kenny with XY. This is for Secretary Wormuth. Some of your comments during the opening ceremony seem to recognize an end to the GWAT era. You at one point grouped the war on terrorism with other past wars, and then said today we are ready to defend this country as we once again face nuclear-armed near-peer competitors. Do you believe that the GWAT era is now over and that the new doctrine that you're releasing is heralding in a new era for the Army?
I think certainly, you know, we're in a new era of being focused on peer competitors. You know, you see that in the National Defense Strategy, you see that in Secretary Austin and other DoD leaders talking about China as the pacing challenge and Russia as an acute threat. But we still have a problem with violent extremist organizations. There's no doubt about that. You know, just ask the Army soldiers who are in Iraq and Syria dealing with that, as well as in Africa, for example. So I think we're going to continue to monitor and deal with that problem as it needs to be dealt with, but it's not going to be at the center of our strategy the way that it was for the last 20 years.
So, sorry, so are you saying there is, like, the war on terrorism is over? Are you saying the war on terrorism is over? It is now, like, not as global or as much of, like, front and center of the Army?
I think the way I would characterize it is that the level of our focus on violent extremist organizations is not at the level of a war. You know, it is an ongoing challenge and problem that we have to manage.
Let's come up here to Davis. Front row.
Hi, Davis Winkie, Army Times. So the Fort Hood report faulted multiple general officers for seeding the social media space in the wake of the Vanessa Guillen death. However, the IG report that we've obtained about Pat Donahoe, where his retirement is now delayed and he's pending disposition, says that his tweets when he was responding to Tucker Carlson's comments about women in the Army and in the military cast the Army in a negative light. Where is the middle ground where you want your senior leaders to exist and engage on social media? You have folks who are getting hammered for not doing it, and folks who are getting hammered for seizing it and doing it to, you know, the greatest extent that they think appropriate. What do you want your next round of general officers to do with regards to social media engagement?
I think, Davis, the key with social media, you know, it's a really important, obviously, information tool. But the key for senior leaders in an environment that is as politicized, unfortunately, as the one that we're all operating is to exercise good judgment. You know, one of the things I think that's most important to General McConville and I is keeping the Army apolitical and keeping it out of the culture war. Because frankly, we have got to be able to have a broad appeal. You know, when only 9% of kids are interested in serving, we have got to make sure that we are careful about not alienating, you know, wide swaths of the American public to the Army. So I think, you know, we absolutely want our general officers out on social media, but they need to exercise good judgment. You know, they need to be positive and factual about what the Army offers, but not, I think, get drawn into, frankly, some of the inflammatory kind of environment that, frankly, Twitter really lends itself to.
Let's go to Andrew Everston, Breaking Defense.
Sorry. Thank you. Andrew Everson with Breaking Defense. Secretary Wormuth, during your speech today, you mentioned that you've asked General Daly to lead a comprehensive effort to strengthen the Army's logistics and sustainment effort in the Indo-Pacific. Can you provide a little bit more detail on what you've asked General Daly to do and what some of the specific lines of effort are and the goals?
Sure. Well, we're just getting started with that initiative, but there are a few things that I wanted to emphasize. First of all, I think we really have to focus on contested logistics in the Indo-Pacific, which is the most demanding theater, if you will, from a logistics perspective because of the distances involved and all of the, obvious reasons. So I think, what's really going to be useful about what General Daly and the great team at Army Materiel Command, what they can do is to, like I said, look at where there are opportunities with things like autonomous distribution, with things like energy efficient combat systems, to try to really explore, where can we get ahead, leveraging those kinds of technologies, or making greater use of predictive analytics. And then really emphasizing partnering with the commercial sector. We have a lot that we can learn, I think, from the kind of innovation that's happening in the commercial sector. And, I think we've done a very good job of partnering with industry around the development of new combat capabilities. But I think we need to make sure we're fully exploring what we can do in terms of logistics with the commercial sector. So I think that's really where he will be focusing.
Let's come back up to the front to Haley.
Hi, Haley with Task and Purpose. You mentioned how important it is to sort of not alienate the public at this time when you're trying to recruit more. But frankly, over the last few days, a lot of soldiers who exist in more marginalized groups feel alienated by their own, organization that they exist in. So what would you say to, the women in the Army, soldiers of color who saw this response to Pat Donahoe, to this, and thought the Army's not going to have my back anymore, and no one's coming to my defense, when these very volatile political figures come after them and question their service and their belonging?
Yeah, and I certainly do not want soldiers, whether it's women or whether it's soldiers from, other communities to feel alienated. And I think, we always want to have the backs of our soldiers. I think there are ways to do that are more effective than others. And for example, I know in the past, I'm pointing down there towards the SMA, he has on occasion, spoken up for women, whether it was about, against negative commentary about their ability to be in combat or their maternity uniforms. So I think that there is absolutely a way to stand up for our soldiers and have their back. But again, I think the key really is tone and kind of, looking at your audience.
Yeah, I'll come on to that too. We're talking about women in the Army. My wife was a soldier. My daughter's a soldier. We have 185,000 women serving with distinction in the United States Army. I've served with women multiple times in combat zones. One that I remember very specifically in 2004 when the Joff was getting overrun. We got a frantic call from the Corps headquarters. Could we get aircraft down there? And we responded with a team of Apaches, and they got down there and they saved a whole bunch of lives. And the leader of that Apache team was CW2 Cindy Rochelle, and I don't remember anyone questioning her gender after they saved her life. I think it's really important. Those stories need to be told, not necessarily getting into a left-right back and forth on Twitter. We just need to talk about and show what our soldiers are doing, and that's what we need to do.
And one more thing, Haley, I would emphasize is I think more broadly in terms of soldiers coming from marginalized communities or demographics that are not widely represented in the Army. That's part of why we've got to emphasize positive command climates and inclusion. We get criticized, frankly, sometimes for being woke. I'm not sure what woke means. I think woke means a lot of different things to different people. But first of all, I would say if woke means, we are not focused on warfighting, we are not focused on readiness, that doesn't reflect what I see at installations all around the country or overseas when I go and visit. But I think, we do have a wide range of soldiers in our Army, and we've got to make them all feel included. And that's why a lot of our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are important.
Okay, let's go over to Tara.
Hi, Tara to follow on some of the Donahoe questions, is the Army considering revising its guidance to senior leaders about engaging on social media platforms in the wake of this?
I think, Tara, it's something that we should look at. I confess I am not intimately familiar with what our guidance says right now. But I know, for example, we have pre-command courses for our battalion commanders, for example, where the chief and other senior leaders go over all sorts of things to help them prepare for those demanding assignments. And, I think it's certainly worth looking into. Do we feel like, we've got the best available training out there for our leaders who are going to be on social media?
Kimberly Underwood.
Hi, Kimberly Underwood from Signal Magazine. Ma'am, you mentioned directed energy in your speech this morning. Could you and sirs elaborate kind of your goals for FY23 about directed energy and what you're looking for from the industry for and kind of this next advancement of laser energy and directed energy weapons? Thank you.
Sure, I'll start, and I know that the chief will want to add. I think particularly given the unmanned aerial systems threat, we really need to be looking at directed energy as an important capability for the future. So we are doing that, whether it's with the MSHORAD directed energy system that we are working to develop, or the IFPC high-powered microwave. We have a couple of different prototypes and systems that are looking at different kilowatts of lasers. And I think, right now we're seeing some good results with those kind of initial development programs. One of the things I think we're going to have to look at is obviously the cost of scaling up those kinds of programs, because the big advantage is it has essentially an unlimited magazine. So there's a cost efficiency there, but I think, looking then at the platforms and the life cycle costs, we have to make sure that overall it's going to make sense from an overall cost perspective.
Yeah, we've talked about the challenge or the threat of unmanned aerial systems. They're all the battlefield, whether it's violent extremists up to great powers. We're going to see them everywhere. And what we need to do is develop the arrows, if you will, that we're going to use for each specific system. What we want to do is give the commanders multiple options that they can engage lethal drones with. We run from THAAD missiles to Patriot missiles and everywhere in between. And when you start talking about swarms of unmanned aerial systems, we're starting to see. We want to have that capability to engage multiple threats at one time. And where we're going, some of you have heard us talk about Project Convergence, where we're taking multiple sensors, bringing them into an integrated command and control system using artificial intelligence to quickly get that information or data to the right lethal system. And so that's where we see lasers coming into being. We don't want to be shooting Patriot missiles at $100,000 UASs, or they wouldn't be very effective against swarms. So we're trying to give our commanders the capabilities they need to have so they can react to whatever threat they get.
Okay, we'll go to Tony, then Steve.
Hey, Tony, can I ask you, I wanted to ask you about the...
Right there, Tony. Thank you.
I have a hardware question that kind of plays with recruiting. The most enduring symbol of the U.S. Army to those of us growing up was the M1 tank. The tank is your equivalent of the F-18 for Top Gun. Given the lessons we're learning from the war in Ukraine, about how the Javelin and other systems can knock out a tank, where is the relevance to the future of the Abrams, especially in your Army 3.0 doctrine?
Well, I'll take that one. Yeah, I've heard those comments, and here's what I would say, is you don't need armor if you don't want to win. And what I mean by that is, go on the offensive. If you look at, there's some great lessons being learned from Ukraine. I just hope we learn them all. And you talked about javelins, you talked about stingers. That was the initial part of the war, and that was when we were they were in complex terrain and trying to defend, the cities, and they did that very, very well. But you don't win by being on the defense. You have to go on the offense. And so if you take a look at what the Ukrainians have asked for, they've asked for longer range fires. And so you saw the 777s come in there. You've all described HIMARS as a game changer with fires. And then as the Ukrainians go on more on the offensive, what they're looking for is armored vehicles and tanks and such. What I would argue in the future is it's about combined arms. You never want to present your adversary one dilemma. If you just push tanks at them, they can do what you've seen with that. That's why you want infantry, you want armor, you want attack aviation, you want fires, you want to have intelligence. All those systems working together. The other thing I would add is this notion of long-range precision fires. Some HIMARS to us, or where the Army is going, is not long-range precision fires. If you look at the Prism Strike missile that's going to come out, that's going to be 500 kilometers best. We have ATACMS that's about 300. So as you start to see the capabilities, you can start to imagine how this will change, not the nature of war, but the characteristics of war. So we are fielding mobile protective fire because we want to support our infantry and those who have fought in cities, and I think we're going to do that in the future. You want to have that armor capability.
Well, 3.0, kind of like the armor, the future of the tank.
It doesn't get, it's more along the lines of the type of fight that we're going to have, but I think that the difference you're going to see is the importance of data and how we're going to fight. I see, as we developed we have unmanned aerial systems, but we're going to have also unmanned ground systems. And what you're going to see, we do a lot in aviation with man-unmanned teaming. You're going to see a lot of that being done on the ground. You're going to see the capability that commanders are going to have to take the visual, what they're seeing on the battlefield and bring that back into, there'll be a person in the loop and they'll be able to make decisions based on that. The future, we never want to see someone going through a minefield or going through roads with IED that has a manned vehicle in front. We can do that with unmanned capabilities. And I think what you're going to see is systems like IVAS that we're bringing on board. They're coming together. They're bigger and they're a little. It's just like everything else. When you're doing transformational change, it takes some time to get there. But you're going to see how that fundamentally changed the way we operate.
Come up front to Steve.
Hi, Steve with military.com. Secretary, you brought up issues with potential perceptions of partisanship when it comes to Donahoe's tweets. I looked at all of them. I read the IG report. You see issues with partisanship. You need to read those tweets for the jewelers. They just weren't partisan. He wasn't arguing about the estate tax. He wasn't saying vote for Biden. He was saying please support our women in the service. I don't understand how that's partisan. The Army lets Lieutenant Colonel Tulsa Gabbard host Tucker Carlson. You guys had a recruiting event on Fox and Friends recently. I don't know how this whole situation can be interpreted as anything other than the Army bending the knee to partisan media. It seems in avoiding the perception of partisanship. The IG just read as sideshow Bob stepping on rakes. Where do you want your generals to be to avoid that perception, and how is this and how do you want women to see this event?
So Steve, first of all, when I made my comments earlier, I wasn't commenting specifically on General Donahoe's specific...
You were answering a question related to that.
Yes, but I think if you look carefully at what I said, I wasn't speaking directly about his tweets. I have not combed through his tweets. I'm talking generally. I think senior leaders need to be careful about not getting engaged in partisan discussions over social media or in public remarks. So I'm not going to comment on an ongoing investigation. General Donahoe's investigation is not completed and has not come forward for any kind of adjudication. But what I will say again is that I do want our leaders to be able to have a social media presence and to be able to speak up for soldiers and defend soldiers if they're being unduly attacked. But I think in this environment, senior leaders have to choose their words very carefully and exercise good judgment. Unfortunately, we're in an environment where things that people say, including things that the chief and I say, can be taken totally out of context. We, chuckle sometimes because a statement one or the other of us will make is criticized both from the left and from the right. So I think it just demonstrates the difficulty, frankly, of being in the public arena and not being accused of taking a partisan side.
Yeah, as the Secretary said, we're not gonna comment on something that's on investigation, but I think it's really important. I'll tell you what we expect of our generals. We expect the highest level of character. And you may not know this, but routinely, the way our systems works, our generals come, any allegation, any anonymous allegation, imagine if your workplace, any allegation that was made is investigated. And the fact that something is investigated does not mean the person is guilty, has done anything wrong. It's kind of frustrating, especially for generals when they get close to retirement. Someone will make an allegation, and we do have a system, and I believe it's a fair system, and there's plenty of due process and appeals in that, but it does take time. And I believe that the system will handle that case in the appropriate manner like we handle every other case with general officers that happens.
Let's go to Brandy Vincent.
Thank you all so much for doing this. Brandy Vincent, Different Scoop. Secretary, I'm curious, in your view right now, what is the Army's most pressing challenge technologically?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, frankly, the most pressing challenge for us is delivering on fully developing all of the new technologies that we are pursuing right now. Is making good on the 24 and 23, which you've heard us say a lot. So it's, I wouldn't single out one particular technological challenge at this point. I think the challenge for us is getting those results over the finish line.
And then just really quick, are you satisfied with how the Army is using data as a strategic asset?
I think, no, I would say on the one hand, we are doing more and more every day to use data more effectively, and I see it in all sorts of ways. Army Materiel Command, I think, has done a tremendous job to really improve our ability to see our inventory of infrastructure, for example, using data. I was just over in Germany with the 18th Airborne Corps, and the way that we're using data and AI there is tremendous. But we have so much more to do, especially when you compare us to the private sector. And I know, for example, our development of IPS-A has taken a little longer than we would like it to take, and that shows that we still have some challenges. Now, admittedly, anytime you're trying to knit together, 16 different personnel systems, you're going to have challenges, especially if you're the government. But I would say we are putting good steps forward towards being more data centric, but we absolutely, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step.
Let's go to the back corner.
Hi, Louis Martinez with ABC News. Touching on Ukraine, General, today we're seeing an escalation in attacks against civilian targets in Kyiv and Dnipro. Can you talk about what that means when you talk about the general sense of the war that you're seeing in a potential escalation here against more civilian targets, and what that means aside from just the tactical and the strategic level? And for the Secretary, the HIMARS systems, there's been, in the M777s, there's been talk about, will that affect the readiness of the U.S. Army in its active component? Is it something that you always keep in mind? Is it something that you keep in mind when the Ukrainians keep making requests, particularly for attack arms for the future? And for the SMA, when you talk to the other chief enlisteds, we saw that the Army is the one that did not meet its recruiting goals. Are they seeing similar challenges, or are they? What makes the Army's challenges unique from what you're seeing in other services with regards to recruiting?
When you talk about the civilian side of the house, I know I can speak for our Army. We do everything we can to protect civilians. That's what you're required to do, and anything else is against the law of land warfare. So the fact that some may be targeting innocent civilians is just completely wrong.
On your question about the readiness issues for us with M777s and HIMARS, every time the Ukrainians, present the United States government with requests for different types of lethal assistance or other types of assistance, it's evaluated by all of the services in terms of how those requests would potentially impact our readiness. And I think, we've been working very, very closely with OSD, with Secretary Austin, to try to balance and mitigate those risks. So, right now, I think, I am comfortable with where we are in terms of our readiness, certainly. But I think, we obviously do have a finite supply of those systems, and that is exactly why we have put so much emphasis working with our industry partners on trying to increase the production lines for these kinds of systems, trying to produce more javelins, for example. That's also why we've been doing some, frankly, really extraordinary things through sort of telemaintenance with the Ukrainians to help them be able to repair the systems they do have and get them back into the fight more quickly.
And then on the accessions, I think we've all struggled to hire people. Just in America, it's like, everybody's struggling to hire people. So I don't think these challenges are unique to the Army, but we are the largest service, so we have a larger accessions mission. That's just natural. If you're trying to get more and everybody's trying to get the same talent. As you heard the Secretary in her speech, she said 9% have the propensity to serve. Well, that's propensity to serve in the United States Army, Marine Corps, Army, everywhere, National Guard. So I think we all have the same unique challenges. And then lastly, what the Chief said is that we all need to get out and talk about our Army, everybody, not just up here on this road. Everybody down there, everybody in America, we're your Army. We're not somebody else's Army. We're the American people's Army, and we serve to defend our country. And that is a respected profession. And we all need to remind ourselves of this respected profession, because these are the challenges. Everything you just said, those didn't come off the plate of the United States Army. We still have an obligation in Iraq, Syria, and Yukon, and nobody says, well, you didn't meet your accessions goals, we'll take some of those missions away. So we all need to talk well about our Army, but this is not unique to just the Army, and that's the same thing we've said with all this.
Evan Osman.
Thank you, Evan Oxner with Inside Defense. I just wanted to ask, under a continuing resolution, if there's certain modernization programs that you might be most worried about.
Certainly, another CR is going to have negative impacts for us. And there are a number of programs, if I recall, who might have some schedule slippages, particularly if we got into a very long continuing resolution. I apologize, I don't have those names right off the top of my head, but we can get them for you. Sadly, we've all been operating under CRs for such a long time now that we've gotten pretty efficient at kind of managing through them. But again, if we saw a long CR, there would be some programs that would be impacted.
Chris Gordon.
John Rossellando with Newsmax. I was in a talk with the Chief of Naval Operations. He said that they made their goals this year to Top Gun, which the Navy, the Army, consider the Navy's strategy. And the Admiral was like, hey, we have Tom Cruise to thank that we met our goals. Should the Army consider something like that?
I would be very interested. First of all, Tom Cruise, come on down, George Clooney, I know there are others. I'm sure my daughter has much more on-point suggestions about celebrities that we could engage. But, we absolutely would be open to, seeing movies about the Army or TV shows. And we've actually talked to some folks in Hollywood about the possibility of TV shows. I mean, this is them approaching us, sort of not separate from our immediate recruiting challenges. But I do think that that kind of exposure could be very positive. And we do have a good story to tell. I mean, one of the things that's people don't necessarily talk about as much with the recruiting challenges, our retention numbers are really good. So what does that tell you? It tells you when a lot of people come into the Army, they like it. They want to stay. They see all the benefits it can bring. So there's a good story to tell. We just need to work on, I think, finding the right people.
Let's go to Ken in the back.
Thank you. Ken Kraetzer, CaMMVetsMedia, WVOX in Rochelle, New York. We follow West Point training on cyber, and you might call cyber the silent service. And you talked about the need for more data experts in the Army this morning. How do you feel about cyber branch development and cyber readiness?
The Army has really been a leader, frankly, in the cyber domain. We were, I think, the first service to really get going with our cyber warriors, and Army Cyber Command is just doing some great things. We also have the software factory down in Austin, where we are, canvassing folks from all across the Army who, they may be in a bunch of different MOSs that have nothing to do with cyber, but they have the ability to code, and some of them code at a very high level. And so we've sort of gathered those people up and set up a pilot program to really build that expertise, and are looking at kind of how it can best be used in the Army. As an example of, I think, the tremendous things that the Army is doing in terms of cyber and coding, again, when I was over in Germany, I ran into a captain who had gotten a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon under the Army, and was doing, was writing code right there and then that was doing immediate operational things. And I think that's the kind of thing where we can do more, and I'm sure the chief would want to expand on that.
I think we take a look at our sources of commission, whether it's West Point, ROTC. Cyber is one of the top branches. They compete for it. If you want to be a cyber officer of the United States Army, you got to finish at the top of your class as far as whatever commission source you had. And the Secretary said we have a lot of young men and women out there that code at a very high level. The Secretary talked about the software factory, but we had a specialist that's a medic that's down there right now who's been coding since he was 12 years old, and he codes at the PhD level. And part of that from our talent management side is how do we know who those people are? And we got to do a better job of managing the knowledge, skills, and behavior of our soldiers, and that's what the IPSA, Integrated Personnel Pay System, eventually we are getting that field, it's coming, just hold on. And that's how we will be able to identify that talent, but it's absolutely critical. We're going to have, the reason we have a software factory, the reason we have cyber, the reason we have the AI task force up at Carnegie Mellon is we know how important that is, and we are coding on the edge, and we're seeing that happen right now.
And if you really want to hear, in detail about what the Army is doing, I would encourage you to search out Major General Paul Stanton, who was here. He got his chapter got one of the AUSA awards, but he is the CG of the Cyber Center of Excellence down at Fort Gordon, and can talk to you, I'm sure, all day about the tremendous things that our cyber warriors are doing.
Thank you.
Hi, Ashley Murphy with James. You mentioned some of the capabilities that are going to be built in 2024, potentially PRISM and some of these other long-range capabilities. Have any countries agreed to let these capabilities be built inside their country? And are you still looking at the Senkaku Islands as a potential spot to place some capabilities?
We're obviously, the State Department is in the lead for working out, what kinds of basing arrangements might be possible for some of these new systems. And I would say, when you look at, as someone who has worked in sort of the national security space for a number of years now, where countries like Japan and Australia are today, vis-a-vis the challenge of China compared to where they were 10 years ago is really remarkable. And I think a lot of these countries are very, very open to cooperating more with the United States military because of the concerns that they have about China's coercive activities in places like the South China Sea and elsewhere. So our job is really to develop the capabilities and make sure that they're ready, when called upon. But certainly when we talk to, when I talk to my counterparts, when the chief talks to his counterparts for the armies in the region, they're very, very interested in formations like the multi-domain task force, which includes, as I'm sure you know, which will eventually include long-range fires battalions.
We'll come up front and over here.
Thank you, Brian Emerson of Aviation Week. Madam Secretary, in your speech you touched on Artemis and Ares, talking about deep sensing. Can you talk a little bit about the future of how you see these prototypes, Hades transitioning to an actual program, possible guardrail replacement, and when you look at the technology that's available, what you see at PC, what you see at Edge, what is the realistic blend of manned, unmanned you see in Deep Sensing?
I think, you know, when it comes to, you know, we're learning a lot from Ares and Artemis right now, you know, being used in a couple of different theaters. And, you know, we're looking at different kinds of sensors, what kind of platform they need to go on eventually. You know, I think we'll probably be looking to put out, you know, an RFP for the Hades platform, you know, sometime in the coming year. But right now, we're using Ares and Artemis to kind of learn and experiment and better understand what our needs are.
On the end and then in the middle.
Shelley Tingle with U.S. Army Verdict. Ma'am, what role does research and development play in the Army of 2030?
Research and development is really, really important. You know, first of all, especially, you know, I talked a bit in my speech about looking ahead to 2040 and trying to figure out what are those next generation capabilities. Well, that's, you know, a big place where we can use R&D, for example, to help us understand that and to, you know, get some new, at least start looking at some new potential technologies and capabilities. And so we are making sure that we fund research and development. We're also, you know, largely through Army Futures Command, doing a lot to have partnerships with academia so that we can really kind of leverage, you know, the cutting edge that's coming out of academia, where again, they're doing a lot of really interesting research, and the Army Research Lab plays a big role in that, for example.
Go to the middle, please.
Hi, thank you. Matt Baynard from Defense Daily. There's been a lot of conversation recently about, you know, the role of Futures Command as it relates to ASAL, and with kind of that context, as a lot of the signature systems move from development into fielding, you know, how do you view the potential shifting role of Futures Command 2030 and beyond? Is it more about the emphasis on concepts development, and, you know, how can that kind of shift as, you know, Futures Command heads into this near-term kind of post, you know, the 35 signature systems? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would say, you know, I don't see Army Futures Command going anywhere anytime soon. 2030, you know, is still 8 years away. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to be able to deliver the systems that we're already working on in the 6 major modernization portfolios. And AFC and ASALT are going to work together to get that done. But you know, as I said in my speech, AFC and we in the Army more broadly do need to look ahead to 2040 and do need to be looking at what are the next you know, kinds of operating concepts that we need, what are the new kinds of technologies that we need. And that's where I think, you know, Army Futures Command can play a really important role. We have already the part of Futures Command, or excuse me, yeah, part of Army Futures Command that is focused exclusively, if you will, on the future. General Scott McKean and General Steph Ahern, you know, are leading the Future Study Program, for example. But we've now asked General Rainey to really accelerate that and, you know, simultaneously, if you will, look at delivering 2030 and looking ahead to 2040. So I think there's plenty of work for Army Futures Command for years to come.
Okay, folks, we are running long on time, but let me check the phones. Do we have Lee Hudson from Politico dialed in?
Yes, thanks. Lee Hudson, Politico. What is your reaction to the civilian rocket bombing by Russia? President Putin said it was in response to an attack on the Kerch Bridge.
Well, I think as General McConville said, you know, it is horrific that Russia is directly targeting civilians and critical infrastructure for civilians. This is what, unfortunately, though, President Putin and the Russian military has been doing for some time in terms of since the invasion of Ukraine. You know, they have directly targeted civilians, civilian cities, let their soldiers prosecute atrocities against civilians. So it's very, very concerning, but I think it's an extension of the kind of tactics that we've seen from the beginning of the invasion.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have gone long today. I will give the panel, we've covered a lot, but ma'am, sir, any closing remarks?
I would just thank you all for being here. You're a way for us to get the word out about the United States Army, and so really appreciate your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of the convention.
And if you need any more assistance, the Public Affairs team is set up just across the way in our Media Operations Center, so don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you to our panel, and if everyone could stay in place.